Alright, so we're going to take this temporary pinion. Remember we told you we shaved the nut down on it so it doesn't have a locking nut on it. And we're also, so now we don't have to fight that locking nut every time. So you can see this right here, that nut is shaved down. As we showed you earlier, and originally it's like that with it crimped on top. So we just put it on the milling machine, shaved it down so we could just buzz it on and off without having to ruin the nut. So the last time we'll put a new nut on there, and once we get that all back apart again, and my other camera I lost. So we're gonna drive this. I don't think I can do this actually. I need my brass hammer. So my brass hammer I'll take and I'll punch this pinion right here, and I'll just lightly tap that out of there. So that'll be our temporary bearings. We'll have to repress this back on again. Well, here I could do my little technique that I showed you a little bit ago about pulling that off. I'll show you how you can do that by a steering wheel puller. Not made for this, but it works awesome. So you take a steering wheel puller and just put it on temporary like this. Put your thread in here so the nut is off of it, but the yoke has actually got a slight press onto it right now. So this just pulls up on that, and you pop that right out of there. Had that backwards because all the pinion bolts are the other way. So there we go. So instead of having to beat that apart with a hammer like most people do, you can just use a tool that isn't designed for that at all, but everybody's probably got one in their toolbox. Little steering wheel puller on the yoke, and especially when you got to put it together, take it apart, put it together, you're not beating the crap out of your fresh paint and everything. Quick little technique and tip for these bearings right here. We took the die grinder and we ground the inside of these down, so this just slides right on there. There's no press. We used the original crush washer just to get a preload pretty close right there. We checked our pinion depth and our pattern on our gear set here with this temporary set in here. So now we're going to pull these right. We can just slide these right off. We'll press new bearings on here on both sides. Then we'll set our crush washer and everything as well. And hopefully that will be the last time we have to do that, and we didn't screw up something else. Changed once we make this last shim change, hopefully the last shim change. So we're gonna get this thing all bolted back together, torqued down with the crush washer and everything. Once we get that done, then we can get back to our shim stack stuff on here. Remember, the pinion gear is tight and torqued and everything already. Our bearings are pressed on the outside right here. They're pressed on. They're put with some assembly oil that's really sticky and stuff on there. When you press these bearings down, something very important to note is the shoulder of this carrier sticks up a little bit farther than the bearing race does. So you have to use something that goes deeper like this, that can go farther down past the shoulder, because if you just press with, say, a plate like this, I don't know if you can see that. There's a gap in between that right there because it hits right here before it hits on the bearing on the outside otherwise. So you have to make sure these bearings go all the way down and are seated all the way against the back. So quick little note of that, you can also use an old bearing race for that as well. So you put the bearing race upside down in the press, and now you push it in there. This doesn't impede and stop the thing from going all the way. So now you get the bearings all the way tight down on there. Another little tip and trick that might save you a little bit of a headache, because if this isn't all the way in there and you don't notice it until after you did a bunch of shim changes on these ends, now you have to press the bearings on and start all over again with everything. And if you did assemble it with new bearings on it and a new seal already, you screwed yourself, because now all of that will have to come apart too. So really make sure that you press these bearings on here all the way on both sides before you go any farther, or you will screw yourself. And I've done that before, and you'll remember that the rest of your life, unfortunately, but you will never do it again. So quick little note, and let's continue getting this thing put together. You're putting it back together. You want to make sure each one of the shims that are on each side of these, there's a shim on each side. Sometimes there's a stack of shims on each side. When you pull this rear diff section out of here, they tend to want to fall into the housing depending on what angle that you have it at. I have it sitting on stands right now, and I have a clamp that I can adjust so I can lock it into position into rotation. So I turned it a little bit this way, so that way I can let gravity work to help keep everything down in there. Because if you're doing it while it's in a car and you take that rear section out, all of a sudden all the shims fall all over the place. That's when you really don't have any bit of a baseline to start with at all. And it's really a frustrating point to start out that way. So what I did is I had somebody play catch with the pieces that were out here, and actually grabbed the shim stacks on both sides as it came apart, and then we took the rear diff and measured the shim stack on each side and made sure that this same shim thickness of shim stack actually is going back in it. And I just noticed something really crazy about this shim that was in there from the factory. It's actually got a crack. I don't know if you can see that at all. This one is cracked all the way across. It's all the way through too. I can see it on both sides. So this shim stack is actually broken right here. I've never seen that before. I have no idea what would cause that, unless this got put in on like a piece of sand or something like that when they tighten it up, and that would have broke it. Other than that, very rare to see those break. So we're going to replace this with a different shim stack anyways. This was a factory one that we measured and took note of. All my notes are underneath my indicator and stuff here, and we took note of how thick it was, so put it together. And the pinion shaft now, remember the pinion has got mock-up bearings in it. It's got new races in it, and it's got the old bearing and old crush collar in it that we took on the we took the die grinder to the inside of them and made that inside of the bearing. We ground the inside of that race down so that inside of that race actually wasn't a press fit anymore at all. But before we did that, we measured the new bearings, we measured the thickness of the new bearings, we measured the thickness of the old bearings, and made sure that they were both the same, and they were. So we're just using it as a mock-up bearing right now and not even tightening it to the point where it's just tightened to give it some compression right now. However, it's not torqued, and their crush collar is not in there right now. So that'll be one of our last steps, and neither is the seal. So knowing that this hook all could go in and out of there a couple of times, because sometimes you have to shim the back of the pinion as well. This was already in here from the factory, and I used that factory depth pinion shim to mock all this up and put that all together just as a baseline. And then it was put this all together and then do a a first pattern on it like this to see where we're at, and then a backlash check as well. So the backlash check is from 5 to 9 thousandths that it should be set at from the factory, and anything tighter than that is going to give you not enough room for oil in between here, and it will burn your ring and pinion gears out very fast. If they're too tight, the lubrication can't even fit in between there. That's why there's a spec from that. The one that we took out of here, we put the indicator on here. We got the specs for that right off the bat before I took it out, and it was at 7 thousandths of backlash. And right now it's at 4 thousandths of backlash. So the backlash is a little bit tight yet, and we're going to open that up when we do our next shim stack. So we'll end up having to pull all this back apart again, but we just did a little preliminary depth of our pinion check and our gear pattern on both the Coast and Excel side. The pattern's looking pretty darn good, and I think we're actually going to be pretty darn close with that. So if we just take and move this shim stack over here, so we give it a little bit, we'll take a couple thou, probably 5 thou out of here, and this should open this up to about 7, I'm hoping. So in between like 4 and 5 thousandths, we're going to take out of this side, put everything all back together again, snug everything all up again, and cross our fingers our pattern didn't change too much, and then we can still get this thing all back together. We still have to take all of this back apart for the 3rd time at least, if not more, and that's why this is so tedious. You have to put all this stuff together, and to make any of these changes you have to pull it back apart again, pull these shims out. There's no way to get them out of there unless you kind of rock the whole assembly back out of here and then pull the shims out. So it's kind of a all or nothing kind of deal, and it's a constant, it's very monotonous. So that's why I've been breaking away to time lapses as I'm doing this as well. So a little bit of explanation in between it, otherwise this video is going to get forever long and boring for everybody. So we'll break to some more time lapses here, show you kind of, and then I'll stop and explain again what we did in that amount of time. So hang on, we're about ready to do this all over again. Together at the same time, it works really well. To make sure your bolts are out and get them out a little ways, just pull out on them, do some wiggling and pulling at the same time, and they just come right out and they don't fling across the room and get crap all over everything. Remember, we got a little bit of assembly oil that's a little bit sticky all over everything too, so everything gets slippery, and it's easy to start launching parts across the room. We've already torqued our outer bolts at 65 foot-pounds, and those have red Loctite on them as well. So they have Loctite on them. They're torqued down at 65 foot-pounds. This is a 373 gear ratio that we're changing to from the 342s, and then plus adding the the posi unit from Yukon rear differential. So we're going to get all this changed out and hopefully get this shim stack right, possibly the next time. And honestly, I think right now I'm pretty happy with, we're pretty darn close with our pinion depth and everything. That looks great. So I think what I'm going to do is take this stack out, note the shims that are in it, and then make a 5 thousandths change of less shim on this side. And I'm just going to write that down so I don't forget when I take this thing all apart. And then what we're going to do is put the real pinion bearing in, and that will press on, and the other pinion bearing on the other side, and then we'll torque that with the crush washer, because I'm confident enough with that. That's in a pretty close place where we can get this really easily, the rest of the pinion depth if we need to. So we're going to pull everything back apart again. We'll press the real bearings on it. We'll put the seal on it at that time and put everything all back together again, and cross our fingers we don't have to take that portion of it back apart again, but it happens. So it's kind of surprising, one little small change, how much it affects other changes. You move it over to the side, it changes the pinion depth as well. So the pinion depth can be shimmed from the back of the pinion, and it can also be changed on the side from moving it from one side to the other. So both things will affect the depth and the gear pattern at the same time. So it's kind of a tedious process going kind of back and forth, but remember, clean, clean, clean is the key, especially when you get one that's grenaded up like that and it's got shrapnel and powdery metal all over it everywhere. It just took forever to clean this thing out with so many little nooks and crannies that were just full of that powdered metal. And you have to clean everything. You have to clean your gears, your bearings, the surfaces, everything on there should be clean before you start to assemble, before you start to do this kind of stuff. Because one little grain of sand, one little chunk of brass off of your brass punch in between one of these gear sets will throw everything off. You could have a perfect pattern on this side, and you get to the other side and you do a pattern check on it there, and it's way off because there's a piece of crap in between here. And if that happens, that could just mess your readings all up and just throw everything completely off. So you want to make sure that you have zero gap in between the sides here, and that's all torqued down. It's flat. There's no debris in there before you put it back together. There's no burrs on anything, and that will give you the best opportunity into getting this set up right and not having to do this job again. Go from there, I guess. Hopefully you guys learning a little bit, and let's go to time lapse and take some more parts and pieces off of this thing. Don't forget to like this video. Click like, throw me a comment, let me know what you think. Ring the bell for those notifications when we get a new video. We got lots more coming up, guys. A lot of cool stuff coming up. I hope you guys are enjoying the ride.